Good morning. It's Wednesday, August 7th. Iran's multi-front war in the Middle East is now 306 days old. I'm Rich Goldberg, FDD Senior Advisor, filling in for Jonathan Shanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Iran and Hezbollah continue to signal an imminent large-scale attack on Israel. And while we all wait in Washington, Israel's staying on offense against Iran-backed targets in Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank. The White House appears committed to Israel's defense, but steadfastly opposed to its offense, a key component of any country's self-defense. And Yahya Sinwar, the maniacal mastermind behind the October 7th massacre, has been named the new leader of Hamas, just as the terrorist group increasingly appears to be unraveling. So what's next? Will Iran force an escalation in its multi-front war? Will we see a breakthrough in hostage negotiations? Or is the status quo our fate for the months ahead? We'll explore all the possibilities this morning here on the FDD Morning Brief. Our guest this morning is Melissa Weiss, executive editor of Jewish Insider. She has a lot of traveling and insight under her belt. Hang tight for that interview in just a few minutes. And now, my thoughts. What will Iran do next, and how will Israel respond? Those are the top questions you hear on the news. I want to ask two different questions this morning. What is the United States doing? And what isn't the United States doing? Because if you want to understand how we got here and how events will unfold from here, you need to know the answers to those two questions. Right now, the Biden administration has a sanctions waiver in effect, giving Iran access to $10 billion in budget support, money that gets laundered from Iraqi dinar into euros and then lands in Iranian bank accounts in Oman. Right now, the Biden administration turns a blind eye to Iranian oil exports to China, an intentional decision to give Iran billions of dollars more. Right now, the Biden administration refuses to trigger the snapback of UN sanctions, which would restore the international arms and missile embargoes on Iran. And right now, while the Pentagon is surging naval assets to defend Israel from an imminent missile attack, which is laudable, there is not a single statement I can find from the Biden administration warning Iran of a single consequence it will face if it launches that attack. No sanctions waivers will be rescinded, no oil sanctions to be enforced, no snapback to be triggered, and no support for Israeli military retaliation. Quite the opposite. All we have are calls for Israel to de-escalate and hold back a counterattack. What will Iran do, and how will Israel respond? Those are the questions you hear. Well, right now, Washington is giving Iran a green light to attack, and it's giving Israel a red light to respond. It's an upside-down, broken policy, and it's a big reason why the Middle East is on fire today. And those are my thoughts for this morning. Now, your morning headlines. Iran allegedly requested advanced air defenses from Russia. According to two Iranian officials, the Russian deliveries, which include radars and other advanced equipment, have already started to roll in. My colleague here at FDD, John Hardy, advises that we take these claims with a bit of grain of salt. We don't know exactly what systems Moscow is purportedly sending or how many, but that doesn't negate the fact that Tehran and Moscow are wasting no opportunity to strengthen their alliance, and that's alarming. On Monday, the secretary of Russia's Security Council arrived in Tehran to meet with a delegation of high-ranking regime officials. He pledged Moscow's full cooperation with the Islamic Republic as it prepares to attack Israel to avenge the presumed Israeli assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Headline 2, speaking of Ismail Haniyeh, guess who Hamas has named as his replacement? We talked about it at the top. Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza and the mastermind behind the group's October 7th assault. He's already been at the top of Israel's hit list, and for the past 10 months, he's been operating from the terror tunnels that zigzag underneath Gaza. Sinwar will now assume control of Hamas's so-called political bureau, which is based in Qatar. But don't expect Sinwar to relocate. He only has one future address that the Israelis have in mind, and that's somewhere in hell. Indeed, following Hamas's announcement, IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari stated in an interview that the only place Sinwar belongs is alongside Haniyeh, Hamas's late military chief, Mohammed Deif, and the rest of their terror gang. Headline 3. Great news, everyone. Rest easy. The UN has investigated UNRWA. And would you believe it? The agency that employs and funds Hamas terrorists and that knowingly lets Hamas use its facilities for terror operations has no provable terror finance problems. The UN's Oversight Office was asked to investigate reports that UNRWA employees participated in the October 7th massacre. And they could only come up with a strong maybe 9 employees, 9 were fired because they might have been part of the October 7th massacre. But the thousands of other employees known to be Hamas or Hamas family members, they're good to go. Give me a break, people. UNRWA is far more rotten than 9 bad apples. It's rotten to the core. The agency is overrun by Hamas affiliates and collaborates with Hamas at an institutional level. This was a problem before October 7th, and firing 9 employees isn't going to solve anything. What should we do? Step one, make the U.S. ban on UNRWA funding permanent. Step two, impose terrorism sanctions on UNRWA to cut off the rest of its funding. And step three, turn the page on UNRWA and empower turnkey alternatives to help move Palestinians to self-sufficiency in a post-Hamas Gaza. All right. It's now time for our interview this morning with Melissa Weiss, executive editor of Jewish Insider, who is based in Tel Aviv, but this morning joins us live from Washington, D.C. Let's talk to her right now, live on the FDD Morning Brief.
Good morning, Rich.
Hey, good morning, Melissa. It's great to see you virtually, sometimes in person, but virtually now, even though we're all in America, but still virtual. That's just how life goes. But hey, great to have you. Give us a sense this morning of the mood back in Israel, in the government, in the military, out on the street. There's a lot going on. We're all watching this here. What are people watching there?
Sure. So I flew out right after Shabbat ended on Saturday night. But the mood in Israel is tense, right? David Hazoni actually had a great tweet the other day. It was so good that I saved it. He said, "People are asking me what it's like to be in Israel right now. The short answer is it's stressful to know that something's coming, but to have all of the regular obligations of life demanding that you pretend everything is normal. Sorry, gotta go take my kid to swimming lesson." And I think that really sums up certainly the mood on the street, right? We are going about our daily lives because we just don't know, and really, what are we supposed to do? People aren't going to stay in their homes, in their bomb shelters, waiting for something to happen when that could be days or weeks ahead. But on the military level, on the government level, it's even tenser because that's the real high stakes. Senior officials know that every single interaction counts, from the highest levels to mid-level military officials that are coordinating with counterparts in the UK and in Israel. The UK defense minister was just in Israel last week, the UK foreign minister a few weeks prior to that. No one wants a war, right? Least of all Israel, which is already fighting one war that it didn't want in the first place. But this is a part of the broader Iranian strategy, right? Break Israeli morale, deplete troops and ammunition, and attack Israel on all physical sides, not even to mention diplomatically and in the court of public opinion. So things are tense, and they will remain tense until we kind of move past this stage in the conflict.
And I'm curious, I want to dig a little deeper into that man or woman on the street and sort of the feeling there. We've talked a lot here on FDD Morning Brief about the firepower Hezbollah has at its disposal. I mean, far more than Hamas ever had at its height. 200,000 rockets and missiles and drones. And we've seen just a little taste of that that they've dished out. A lot more could be coming. Do people in Israel understand what that could look like? Are they prepared for what the damage, casualties could look like if Hezbollah really unloaded?
Yes and no, because I think back, there's no precedent for this. We had the situation in the middle of April when Iran launched some 320 missiles and drones at Israel. And with that, we had, hours to prepare. So people were making a run on supplies at the local convenience stores. And even in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, there was a rush on supplies. But unlike those two instances, here we have days to prepare for whatever could be incoming. And truthfully, since April, I think people have taken these threats a lot more seriously. I know I have. Now in my apartment in Tel Aviv, I've got a supply of water, canned foods, of non-perishables as a precautionary measure, which is something that I didn't have throughout the winter. But part of this is, of course, the psychological terrorism. something that I saw, I mean, all over Twitter over the last few days are photos of Israelis fleeing Ben Gurion Airport. They were actually taken a couple of summers ago when there were a whole bunch of travel issues because the just travel systems worldwide were overwhelmed by the influx of summer travelers due to COVID. But those photos are making a comeback, and people are saying, look, Israelis are all fleeing the country right now. They're scared. But, I mean, that it couldn't be further from the truth. I was at Ben Gurion on Saturday night. It was business as usual. Obviously, the foreign airlines have largely shut down operations, but El Al's got, I mean, had half a dozen flights the night that I went out. So, to some extent, there's only so much preparation you can do. On the military side, there's also only so much preparation you can do when you don't really know what's coming or where it's coming from.
I'm curious. You're typically based in Israel. You're here in Washington now, talking to people. Jewish Insider has incredible sources from an incredible reporting team, both based in Israel, covering the Israeli politics, and here in Washington, covering American politics and government. Where are we today in the alignment between the U.S. and Israel? I have my observations on it, but you got a lot of sources. Clearly, close coordination on the defensive measures being prepared for an Iranian attack. But it seems still a lot of daylight, some disconnect on what Israel might or might not do following such an attack.
I mean, there's always been a bit of tension, but the question now is who is making those decisions on the U.S. side? Is it Biden? Is it Blinken? Is it Jake Sullivan, Lloyd Austin, Brett McGurk, Amos Hochstein, Kamala Harris? Who are the key decision makers? And we know that, there is regular communication between Israeli officials and their U.S. counterparts, right? We're seeing, every couple days another readout between Lloyd Austin and Yoav Gallant, for example, Israel's defense minister. So we know that there is a lot of coordination and a lot of conversation. But the question is what Israel might do following any sort of attack, right? Like the question is, what does the Israeli response look like? And that really depends on what the attack on Israel looks like. And of course, whatever the response is going to be to the killings last week of Shukr and Hania, in part depend on what actually happened in Tehran last week. I know earlier in this week, originally we thought that there had been a bomb that had been planted 2 months ago by Mossad agents. And there was a new report come out yesterday from, I want to say, the UK's Jewish Chronicle, saying that it had actually been a smaller bomb planted 9 hours before the attack by IRGC officials who had been working with the Mossad. So really, I mean, Iran is mulling its options right now, right? Like it's still figuring out how it's going to respond, and its response is going to depend on what actually happened in Tehran.
I saw that Jewish Chronicle story, and I laughed about it. And I think there's been a lot of internal conversation among a lot of my colleagues of, is this real? Would the Mossad just reveal this? It seems like a lot of psychological warfare going on against the Iranians, against the IRGC, because now you're in a planning meeting, for the response now. And then it's like, were you the guy who planted the bomb? Were you the guy? You could see this being a little bit of disinformation just to work against them. Before we leave American politics, obviously we had a big news day yesterday. The VP pick by the vice president, her own to be vice president potentially, in Governor Walz of Minnesota. So we have a ticket on both sides now. Sort of what your coverage is. You obviously have a lot this morning and the hullabaloo between Shapiro and Walz. Your take on Walz and any impact you see on foreign policy in Israel specifically.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want a little bit of self-promotion. We had a great piece by my colleague Emily yesterday, hours before the Walz pick was announced, looking at his relationship with the Jewish community, just really shining a spotlight because frankly, most of our readers don't have that much familiarity with Governor Walz. Most of America doesn't have familiarity. And we look at this pick as though, he's going to be determining foreign policy when we all realistically know that the role of a vice president is not that. But it's a signal of, a broader, of where the party is going. And, a few things that are interesting about Walz. He spoke at AIPAC Policy Conference. I want to say it was 2010. And he's called for a ceasefire about 7-8 months in. But he hasn't really weighed in a ton on the war, on what's going on. He did a few months ago have a meeting set up with a group from American Muslims for Palestine, which is, of course, the parent organization of Students for Justice in Palestine. And that delegation had gotten all the way to the meeting before he canceled it just beforehand, when they said in a preparation meeting that they wanted to push for divestment from Israel. So, I mean, it's hard to say, where he stands on Israel, where he stands on issues that are key to the Jewish community. But I think there's been so much discourse around Shapiro, who was, for all intents and purposes, billed as the front runner for a long time. Well, for a week, which feels like a long time this summer. But the question, it's less for me about where these different candidates stand on the issues, and more how the different segments of the Democratic Party are reacting to the selection of Waltz, the choice not to select Shapiro. And there's been some really ugly stuff. I think it's hard to look at the last week and a half and say that there hasn't been a significant degree of anti-Semitism around the pushback for Shapiro, who holds similar positions to Waltz, to Kelly, to Bashir, to Cooper, who was, out of the running pretty early on. But they were all pretty similar when it came to Israel, when it came to fighting anti-Semitism. But the ugliness targeted at Shapiro is really hard to ignore. And, I hope that is something that is addressed on the campaign trail. I hope, they use Shapiro as a surrogate. I hope he continues to speak about his Jewish faith. I'm sure everyone has seen his speech that he gave at Harris's rally yesterday, in which he quoted Pirkei Avot. He talked very emotionally about his own faith and how it inspires him. So that's something that we're keeping an eye on. Obviously, we will be following the elections very closely over the next 3 months, and we'll see what happens.
Melissa Weiss, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us today on FDD Morning Brief.
Thanks so much, Rich.
And here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleague Ivana Stradner has teamed up with Jason Smart for a piece in the Kyiv Post highlighting the troubling success of Russia's ideological war against the West, exemplified by its support for Venezuela's autocrat, Maduro. They argue that Maduro is a crucial Putin proxy who must be defeated, and emphasize that the United States and its allies need to remain steadfast in opposing the forces that seek to undermine Western values. That includes the Kremlin and its puppets. FDD's chief executive, Mark Dubowitz, is out with a very smart piece in The Telegraph warning European leaders that their betrayal of Israel as it faces down threats from Iran will alienate Republicans critical of continued funding for Ukraine's defense. It seems that some Europeans have quickly forgotten what it took to unlock the long-delayed defense aid from the United States to Ukraine, which was bipartisan with American support for Israel. And finally, if you haven't heard enough from me today, I've got a piece in the Wall Street Journal, a letter responding to a smear campaign being waged by Israel's detractors and some useful idiots on the right who falsely claim that state anti-BDS laws somehow restrict speech. Well, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals disagrees, and the Supreme Court has declined to hear any charge of that nature. Companies that boycott Israel have no constitutional right to state contracts or investment. Israel boycotters hate state anti-BDS laws for one reason and one reason alone: they work. My advice: states should start investigating MSCI, a large financial firm that imposes negative ESG ratings on Israel-based companies. To me, it's dead to rights BDS. Okay, that's going to do it for today. Read our expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Read our quick takes on X at FDD. Support our work with a tax-deductible donation, fdd.org/invest. Tune in Friday for more news and analysis here on the FDD Morning Brief. In the meantime, we'll be keeping tabs on the latest out of the Middle East. Make sure you're checking out our flash briefs as well if you're interested in the crisis moment to moment going on in the Middle East. It's a critical tool you should be using all day long. Thanks for letting me host you today. John Shanzer will be back on Friday. But in the meantime, I'm Rich Goldberg signing off for FDD.